Welcome, welcome, welcome. So thrilled to have our fabulous speakers, Elite 200 community, and 23 GSV Cup applicants with us here today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and energy with us. This year, we're going big on Startup Academy. Based on your feedback, our Academy this year will be more focused on delivering highly specific, tailored, and relevant content for the early stage EdTech community prior to the ASU GSV Summit. Then, when we're in person together, focus more on relationship building and connecting with investors. The Startup Academy Learning Series is going to be dedicated to 3 topics: growth, product, and people, and bring in experts in these fields to provide insights based on their experiences each month. With that said, I'm so pleased to kick off our first ever Startup Academy Series session focused on B2B Sales Strategy. The session will be about 25 to 30 minutes of a discussion and then 15 minutes of Q&A. Please send in questions you have via the Zoom submit a question function and we'll get them answered. We have 2 fantastic leaders here to speak with you today. Trish Sparks, the CEO of Clever, and Zayd Badwan, the Vice President of Enterprise at CoRise. Let's get our speakers out here.
Hey, Fran.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much. So to kick us off, I might ask each of you to maybe give a 90 seconds on yourselves and your company. Trish, maybe starting with you, and then we can kick into the meat of it.
Sure, I can kick us off. So I'm Trish Sparks, CEO of Clever. I've been CEO for about 3 months now, but I've been at Clever for about 3 years. For those years, I was leading our customer success, operations, support, and sales teams. But I've actually been in B2B sales for about 2 decades. So lots of stories to share, tips, things not to do, all those things. But I actually started out my career in the classroom, believe it or not. I was a middle school teacher in a public school here in North Carolina. So I'm so happy to be at Clever. Basically, Clever makes it easy for students and teachers to access their EdTech in the classroom without having to remember lots of URLs and passwords. We just make it super easy for kids to get to EdTech. So that's what we do at Clever.
Awesome. And I'm Zayd Badwan. I'm the Executive Vice President of Enterprise at CoRise, which is a new EdTech that's actually only launching next month and starting to kind of figure out our exact product market fit right now. CoRise is a cohort-based live learning platform that allows organizations to both contextualize and build community within their technical space. We're focused on the data skill sets today. I've been in the what I call adult learning space for the past 15 or 20 years now, because when I started in this space, the word EdTech didn't even exist or wasn't what it is today. So I started my work in an actual classroom like Trish, but or predominantly with adults, focused on soft skill training and instructor-led training model. Then spent 5 years leading customer success at Coursera, and then recently joined the CoRise team to figure out what the next evolution of EdTech looks like.
Fantastic. Let's hop into it. And we'll start off, Trish, with a question for you. When you're making a sale to a school, how do you really determine who the best buyer is for your product? And how do you determine if a top-down or a bottom-up approach might be better utilized?
Yeah, great question. Really, the best buyer for us is typically the person that we are able to remove the pain from. So many folks in our school system struggle with lots of data integration issues, getting data flows to the right places, and also just teachers in the classroom having a hard time wasting time on logging into EdTech versus getting the kids into their learning right away. And so for us, typically, it is the person that can remove that pain for the teachers. Many times our IT district administrators is where we end up spending a lot of our time, but also keeping in mind, depending on the product that we're selling, we have free products and we have products that we sell to districts. And depending, we also need to identify who has the budget, right? So a lot of times people have the pain, but they don't have the budget. And when you find the person where those two things are combined, that's the sweet spot for sure. As it relates to top down and bottoms up, Clever has really been successful in the bottoms up kind of model for quite some time, but we're finding more and more, especially with our identity management solution, that a tops down approach from like the CIO is actually super effective.
Love that. Yeah. Especially the part about focusing on the person whose pain point, you're most addressing. I think that's just so important and insightful. And yeah, Zayd, turn it over to you. How about at enterprises?
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly to anyone who's done sales in the past, it's not shockingly different than what Trish just walked us through. But I think, and at Co-Rise specifically right now, we're much earlier than where Clever is in their journey. And so for us, we're still thinking a lot about product market fit, which many of the folks listening in might also be thinking about right now. And part of our process is we think about like who are the right buyers for a product like Co-Rise. We're trying to stay as open-minded as possible, because one of the traps you can fall into as you go to market is like, oh, we think this is our buyer, or we think this is the profile that we're looking for. But the truth is to Trish's point, like sales works like magic when you find a problem you can solve. And then finding the person that feels that problem the most, and then qualifying that person in terms of, do they have budget? Do they actually want to fix this problem? Do they care enough about this problem? So right now, as we sort of figure out our own product market fit journey at Co-Rise, we're staying pretty open-minded. We're looking for different pain points within an enterprise, whether that be within the learning and development space. There's this like new evolution of like titles. I'm sure some of you have even experienced this. There's the technical enablement person who used to think about like onboarding of like actual tools, but now they're thinking about skill sets and skill development. And they're basically the new version of a technical L&D leader. And then there are also the functional potential buyers, like the CTO, the chief data officer, head of Eng, that are feeling pain as they recognize that there are skill gaps within their organization. And then if they're willing to sort of solve that problem and have budget to put towards it, then we sort of identify that as the potential buyer as we sort of define what our different ideal customer profiles might look like.
100%. First off, sales work, that quote about sales works like magic. That's an awesome quote. And I guess a follow-up question, and maybe I'd ask you both to touch on it really quick, is how do you determine who that person is who has that budget when you're first approaching a prospect? Like tactically, like a real example. Like how would you determine that? And Zayd, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Trish.
Yeah, and it's gonna sound silly, but just ask. I think one of the things I've seen is in leading revenue owning teams in the past is we can spiral because it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. And either you get an answer really quickly and know where to focus your time and your energy, because at this time, all of our time is so precious. And like when you're growing in fast growth, you can't spend a lot of time on folks that aren't qualified buyers. So being able to comfortably build a relationship that enables you to ask, then either you know that this is a qualified buyer, or you can chart a path with that champion to figure out who has the budget, where would it come from, is there a CTO or a CDO that we can go talk to that might be willing to put a little money in front of this problem? So my general answer is like, just ask.
Absolutely, Zayd. You nailed it. Just ask for sure. I would also say it matters how you ask, because there are some folks, if they're your day-to-day stakeholder, they may feel like, oh, you think I'm not important and only the budget holder is important, but like really partnering with them, as Zayd mentioned, like setting them up for success, making sure that you get their problem solved, and like, okay, how can I partner with you to go to the person that they can actually purchase this product and make it feel like it's a partnership. And usually that has worked really well, because so many times you can't tell by titles. You can't go on LinkedIn and tell by the title who has the budget. So without asking, you never really know, and you could be wasting a lot of time otherwise.
Yeah. And every organization is so different. One of the realizations that we had about 2 years ago, actually, in working with enterprises in terms of their purchasing of EdTech, we were finding chief learning officers with a $0 budget. And so if you don't ask, you might spend a lot of time on what looks like an ideal customer profile that ends up having no ability to actually acquire or invest in the solution that you've been pitching them.
100%. And, I just love how the focus for the two of you guys is really on relationships, because it's such a relationships driven, business, and making sure everyone feels, welcomed and important and stuff like that. So great insights.
Yeah, well, we both come from a customer success background, and that is the key to driving good customer success.
100%. I think we'll take a quick pivot here. We'll talk more about building out sales teams. How do you, and Trish, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Zayd. How do you think about when you're building your sales team and scaling your sales team, what's like a milestone that says, all right, it's time to bring in that first SDR, or it's now time to bring in that first sales leader, or think about what level of person is right to bring in next and why? I think a lot of people would appreciate some color on that.
Yeah, for sure. As Zayd mentioned earlier, product market fit. Going too fast with a product that you haven't found fit yet can be really detrimental, and in a lot of ways, not only physically at the company, but from a morale perspective, people feeling like, they have this great thing to sell and then you end up not being successful. So being patient with product market fit is a really important thing. And once you find it, be ready to go and go hard. I also think it depends on the product as it relates to how you scale first. With some products, you may want some, just a couple of really large enterprise skilled sales professionals when you're going to have a lower volume, but larger deals. Versus if you have a high volume, but smaller average sales price, then you may go down the route of SDRs. And so there's not a one size fits all playbook. It really depends on your market when you find product market fit, what your average sales price is going to be, and then, or average contract value, and then what kind of sales volume you're taking on. And all of those things should factor into which roles you hire first and how many of them.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Trish. And the only thing I would add is it also depends on where your own organization's life, or where you sit in the life cycle of growing your organization. So at CoRise, where we're still really early, we're probably going to lean towards hiring like a SDR junior salesperson that can help us with some of these smaller design partner deals that we're working on right now. But it's so critical from my vantage point to stay so close to like every pitch, every solution that we're building, every launch that we're driving, because this is when we're learning rapidly. And I'm always afraid that if you bring in a senior person early, you might go down a rabbit hole or not focus as much and spend as much time as you would at this phase at a company like CoRise, where most of our customers are design partners. And so we're learning, like every conversation I'm walking away with like, oh, wow. So even if you do hire salespeople or SDRs, just stay super engaged, stay super close to any customers you're working with, because you'll learn a lot about your own product market fit, and you'll learn a lot about like churn risk or growth risks or opportunities. And so I agree with Trish that it really depends on the product and the size of the deal, but you as a leader staying close is critical.
100%, 100%. Let's pivot to some tangible tactics that you both have deployed to shorten sales cycles. Trish, maybe we'll start with you and selling to schools, but I'd also love to get your perspective on like how you, on the same sort of answer with regards to how you sell to EdTech companies. Like what are some tactical examples practically you've used to shorten sales cycles?
Yeah, actually, the two things that we have done, we did on both sides of the house. We do have a dual-sided marketplace. We sell to districts. We also sell to EdTech vendors, which are application partners. But two things that we've done over time that's really helped. One is improving the qualification process. Zayd mentioned this earlier, like if you allow the qualification process to go on too long and you're unsure about if this person has budget or authority or if the need is actually there, then that can waste a lot of time. So getting your SDRs really tight on a good, solid qualification process, I think, is phenomenal. And then also really making sure that your SDRs and your AEs are trained on effective org navigation. spending too much time with the wrong people will just send you down a rabbit hole and really extend the sales cycle significantly. So there's an art to org nav, such that you don't ruin the relationship by people feeling like you're going around or over them. But effective org navigation is one of the most critical things, I think, to make sure that the sales cycle doesn't go on indefinitely.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Trish is sharing, and I'll share a perspective of an earlier stage organization like CoRise. And so one of the ways that we're thinking about the sales cycle, and if you're in the EdTech space selling to enterprises, you know that the sales cycle, like at best is 6 months and at worst is 12 plus months, because the number of influencers and decision makers on the customer side seems to like grow from day to day. I remember the days where like 3 people would help make the decision on the client side, and now I'm in a meeting with like 27 people and they all have like really strong opinions on what solution they should go with. And so the sales cycle seems to get longer. But at this stage, what's really critical at an organization like CoRise, or many of the organizations I'm sure you're all starting and leading and growing today, is a quicker sales cycle so you can learn really rapidly. And so we're launched, probably not unsurprisingly, like many of you also have, a design partner program, or a design program is what we're calling it, where we're letting organizations commit to a small amount of licenses or like a pilot, but we don't do free pilots. I can't express enough, don't do free pilots. They're never a good idea. They always backfire. So they are investing, so they're customers, but they're under the realm of like, help us build, help us learn. They come in with like more open-minded sort of perspective, and they know that they're going to be building some of this with us. And as you all go down your path of finding product market fit, like we are at CoRise right now, you'll quickly learn that like you don't want to build before you know that this is something that's going to really be able to solve the pain point you think you're going to be able to solve. So we're doing a design program that's like time bound, that's paid for, that's somewhat exclusive to a set number of customers that get to play with you. And all of a sudden you see that like they don't need to go to 27 people just to get approval to do a pilot. They're willing to test and play with you a bit more, and they're more open-minded, and you have a better chance of like landing and then really expanding within some of these accounts if you can do it well.
100%. I mean, such great insights there. I think for me, the highlight might be the comment on OrgNav. I mean, wow, like if you can't get that right, you're going to be twisting and turning, getting thrown over here, thrown over there. It's going to be a wild ride for you. I think next, because we're talking pilots a little bit in that last answer, I'd love to get some insights from the two of you on what are some tactical steps or strategies you use to convert your pilots into real contracts. Does it start with KPI definition at the beginning of the pilot? Like, what are some like literal tactical strategies you've deployed? Would be awesome. And Zayd, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Trish.
Yeah, absolutely. So pilots always should be paid. And you want enough skin in the game on the customer side, even if it's just, in some of these, like, especially in the enterprise space, like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, like this is not a huge amount of money. It doesn't require tons of levels of approval, but it's enough skin in the game that they're going to show up to conversations. I was talking with somebody yesterday at a networking event who said, oh yeah, we ran a bunch of free pilots and then 50% of them never actually deployed the solution. And I was like, well, right, because they didn't have any skin in the game. And so you spent all of your very precious like technical time and business time and design time on these pilots that didn't actually take off because folks weren't fully invested and didn't feel like they needed to lean in on it. And so just some guidance from me on pilots is, I think that when you set up a pilot, it's incredibly important to set sort of like a North Star for the pilot. And one of the things that we've learned that is really important is that you are giving something to a client when you do a pilot, right? Whether it be some pre-integration work or you're discounting the pricing or whatever it is, there's a give and take from both sides. And so setting the expectation that I will be org navigating, I will figure out whom else within the organization might be interested. And I'd love for you, client, to help take us from department to department or team to team to be introduced to other organizations. that our goal is to make this successful and then turn it into like a multi-year contract if you're a more mature organization and you're ready for those types of partnerships. So setting like actual goals upfront with the person that you're going to be working with on the pilot, making sure that both teams have skin in the game is the best way to sort of to run these things. And then last thing I'll share is like what are like agreed upon outcomes of the pilot are absolutely critical so that you can check in on them throughout the pilot life. And then at the end go, this was successful, versus leaving it ambiguous and then being like, I think it was successful. And now do you want a much larger contract?
That was so good, Zayd. I was actually looking for something in there that I disagreed with just so that we could debate. And, don't do free pilots. I totally agree with you. Like I've had a few that have worked in my time, but in general, it's just a rule of thumb that I try to stay away from free pilots for exactly the same reasons that you said. Obviously, success criteria is important. I would also say not only measuring the success criteria, but communicating the success criteria and all of the stakeholders along the way of the pilot internally, making sure that you're reporting back to them regularly on how well the pilot's going and how the success is going, because some of these pilots, they can go 60 or 90 days. And if it's radio silence for all the other stakeholders that could potentially say no for 90 days, then this recommendation at the end of the pilot is going to come out of left field. And so sometimes that's not intuitive, and because you start working with your day-to-day stakeholder and you just stick with that person because they're nodding their head and saying all the things that you want them to say. But don't stop there, because you'll end up very single-threaded with only that one person. So I would say enable that person with all of your success metrics throughout the pilot so that they can be continuously selling internally to the stakeholders and the budget holders that will be able to say yes at the end of the pilot.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Trish, like one thing that we found worked really well with pilots is if you actually preset expectation that first of all, sometimes I've had clients come to us and say, we want to do a 1-year pilot. I'm like, that's just a contract. You just want a really small contract is what you want if it's a year. But if you time bound it to something like, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, preset expectations that on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, bi-weekly basis, kind of whatever the appetite is, that you have an audience outside of that single point of failure, that one person that you're working with, to share results. Because that person can leave, they can be abducted by aliens, they can decide they hate you, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you're multi-threading throughout the organization so that you can share the success of the work that you're doing on some sort of regular basis.
100%. And, just such great insights there. And it almost got back to the org nav point of view there, Trish, in your answer, and setting the goals up front. I mean, that just resonated with me a lot. One thing, and I'm seeing some questions in the chat come in specifically on pilots here, so I'll interject one in, is like, if you have these expectations around how you want to structure pilots at your company, and one of your potential great customers isn't aligned with those expectations, say they want a free pilot, or they want that year pilot, or they want more functionality or a factor in it that you aren't necessarily prepared to deliver, how do you make that decision to leave it on the table or to make that acquiescence? What goes into your thinking there? And Trish, I'd love to start with you here and then pass it over to Zayd.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it always feels bad to walk away from a pilot opportunity. That being said, I can think of multiple times I said yes to a free pilot or to like random success criteria that I knew that we couldn't hit, and regret the time that it took for our teams to work on it and still not be able to deliver on success. And so I have rarely regretted saying no and walking away from a pilot, but I have often regretted saying yes to illy defined or free pilots. And so I would say, if there are reasons that someone doesn't want to pay or needs a very long time to prove success, there's probably some reasons behind that. And maybe they are not properly resourced, and maybe they're going to have to shop around internally after the pilot is done. I mean, it always pays to ask more questions, though, especially if it's a larger account that the payoff is, definitely there. I would say my advice though is to create exception criteria. Okay, so this is how our pilot structure works. If these three things are true, I will approve an exception. If you leave exceptions completely open-ended, then it ends up not being exception-based, and you end up with more exceptions than you do the typical structure. But if you get really clear around your exception criteria, it'll make it easier for your teams, and you'll spend less time spinning your wheels on unsuccessful pilots.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Trish, on that. I'll also say that one of the things I learned really quickly with requested free pilots is that it was often the biggest indicator of lack of qualification, right? Like if they don't have the money to pay for a pilot, they likely don't have the money to pay for a larger partnership. Now, this is like the revenue leader's like biggest nightmare / dilemma, right? Because is that always true? Could they have a culture of pilots? Like you never really know. So sometimes you do want to stay open-minded, especially with reps on your team of like, if they bring you like a Fortune 100 company who says we only start with pilots, there's likely a way to have a conversation with that organization to understand what is it that you're trying to learn in a pilot, and can we prove that to you in a different way? So a lot of times, like other customer references is a really good way to build credibility for your own organization. There's ways to give access to content for like a really small number of people to just review and understand and learn, like a sandbox type situation for a few days. And pilot tends to be like thrown out as a term that folks love using because it's safe, right? Like you have to remember your buyers are taking a risk on you, especially if you're an earlier organization and like they're putting their neck out on the line. And so sometimes if you throw the word pilot in front of it, it's safer. And so trying to understand like, what is it that you're trying to learn in this pilot, and can we solve and give you that information in a different way? And then, even if you want to put the word pilot in it, that's great. There is just some financial sort of obligation that the organization is going to have to show up with to make sure that there's enough skin in the game.
Awesome. Thank you both for the extra color. I think we'll do one more question here, and then we'll shift into some Q&A that the audience has submitted. This one's on the term of the contract. Obviously, your buyers usually will want shorter ones, and you guys will usually want longer ones. What are some, again, tactics, strategies that you've deployed successfully, to really advocate and get those longer term contracts? And Zayd, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Trish on this one.
Yeah, it's interesting. At the stage we're at now at CoRise, I actually don't know if we want a lot of multi-year contracts because we haven't exactly figured out exactly our product market fit within an organization. Now, I wouldn't say no, but we're not going to push it as hard as I have in previous leadership roles that I've had in the past. In part, we want to make sure that we have the space to change and not be held to like any commitment that we've made 6 months ago for the next 2-3 years. We are still trying to figure out like the right pricing model, so trying to figure out the right size, the right engagement level. So right now at our phase, we're not pushing multi-year contracts. But one of the things that we've learned in the past is because often if the customer success team then has to flip single year into multi-year contracts, and it really is about driving incentive for the customer, being able to tell a really, really valuable story around enabling the organization's runway to drive value. So like, we know not a ton of value happens from learning in the first like couple of months, right? It's not how it works. And so sort of walking the customer through, you want 2 years, you need 3 years to be able to actually tell a success story here is one of the key pieces. And you can build white papers around this, and you can build tons of like convincing information or like story around it. And then the other piece that I would say that really worked in my previous world was, we don't do single year contracts, right? Because what we learned as a business in my previous world is there's a lot of cost to setting up and running a single year contract. And you get to a point where you have enough brand recognition, you have enough sort of weight in the negotiation to say that it just doesn't make sense for us to resource a single year contract at this size, because our time is better focused on 2 or 3 year contracts.
Yeah, I agree, Zayd, in that longer term contracts aren't always appropriate. I mean, I prefer them for sure, because a partner that agrees to a longer term contract, they have really made a commitment to a real partnership, and you're in this together and you're going to go all in, and potentially, if it's a strategic partnership, do co-marketing, and if there's any custom development that needs to be done, like those are the types of things that you always want a larger, longer term partnership, because it's going to be harder to deliver on all those things, especially though when we're working with our smaller districts that, they don't have as many resources, and the relationship in the early stages is more transactional. They just want to try out the product to see if it uses or to see if it solves the problem for them. There are times that single year contracts are much more appropriate and just makes the customer feel more at ease that they're not, banking on something they're not sure is going to work. So I do think, though, kind of identifying the type of partnership that you want to build with a particular customer and building the contract around that to reflect the type of partnership that you want will help you determine whether a 1 year or a multi-year contract is actually more appropriate for the type of partnership and what they need.
I love that. Especially, it's like, you got to serve the customer how they want to be met, right? So, I mean, that really speaks to me. Well, awesome. I mean, thank you both for that. Let's hop into some audience Q&A. Yes, this session is being recorded, and we will be sharing it with everyone who's registered, so you can share it with your team members. So we can knock that one off right there. This next question is back to OrgNav. And the question is, how can we assess a potential sales rep for OrgNav capabilities, and how can we train it, if at all? And maybe Trish, we'll start with you, and Zayd, we'll go to you after.
Okay, so I'll start my answer by just admitting my bias. So I worked at LinkedIn in sales solutions for 6 years or so and built customer success and sales teams there. And so I can't say enough about Sales Navigator being able to help with OrgNav. Just learning the basics of social selling, warm introductions, how to really get someone to respond in a way that's meaningful by building meaningful relationships. So that's my go-to, is like social selling best practices. And, I still to this day heavily rely on Sales Navigator for those types of things, in addition to all of the other standard, sales methodologies that talk about OrgNav. But in the last few years, that's really been a game changer for me and my teams.
Yeah, I use it too. I mean, it's an awesome product. I'd highly recommend, folks exploring it. Zayd?
Glad to hear it.
Yes, we also use it. The 2 ways to think about this. One is, at some point as your organization gets bigger, you'll start to do things like have account executives, account managers, customer success managers, and then clearly incentivizing account managers to fill the white space on an organization, account plan, and focus on OrgNav. But before we all get to that size and can justify having that structure, I think it's about becoming wickedly good at account planning and thinking about growth strategies and understanding where are the different parts that you can go within a single Fortune 1000 or 2000 company, and then letting any and all of your customers know that you're going to be doing this and you would really like help doing it. As Trish said, with warm introductions, even internally within an organization. I think the question was around, how do you incentivize people? It should be pretty clear that as the deal grows, their incentives will grow. But it's often not the lowest hanging fruit in a growth company, right? It's like, at least at certain stages, it's easier to close new logos than it is to grow accounts, because you're new and shiny and exciting. And so folks will sign up for smaller deals with you. So depending on the life cycle of your business and where your brand is, whether you overly incentivize new logos versus growth within the install base is sort of a quarter to quarter decision that we've made from previous roles I've had.
Awesome. So this next question is about synergies between sales orgs and marketing organizations, especially as it pertains to lead generation in B2B. And more or less, the audience is asking best practices that you all have used with regards to lead generation from a marketing strategy point of view, and also how the sales and the marketing organizations kind of work together to form that. Would be awesome to get some color on. And Zayd, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, it's a super good question because we're talking about this like every 5 minutes, it feels like right now. One, I think marketing and sales have to be hand in hand, right? Like you have to be so close. And whenever I am either like advising a company or talking to a company, and you just can sense there's a disconnect between the marketing leader and the sales leader, and it's also the easiest place to like finger point when the revenue is off, or the marketing qualified leads are not connecting to sales qualified or sales accepted leads. And my biggest guidance is like those two people should work so close to each other, and they should be super aligned on what's working, what's not working, and how things are going. So that's like my general advice. I think it goes back to my answer, and I think Trish will have a bit of a different answer because Clever's further along than Co-Rise is. But right now, we aren't obsessed with scale in terms of product market fit, in terms of demand generation right now, because we're just starting out. And so the number of leads that we're looking at is a lot smaller than like, I'm sure the number that Trish is looking at a pretty regular basis. And we're like some like strategies we're playing and deploying with right now is like, in a post-COVID world, I'm going to bet that a lot of people want to get out of their houses again. And so we've been toying with this term, like bring the event back, bring the dinners back. Like, let's like set up these like thought leadership opportunities for folks to get together and meet their peers again, and all that good stuff. And one of the biggest lessons I learned, and I can share, Fran, with you, the article that I read it in that I circulated around my own company, was that until you have brand recognition, like a net style demand gen or phishing doesn't work very well, because you're going to get ignored because they don't know who you are. Once you have brand recognition, you can do the more classic demand gen activity. But before that, it has to be personal. It has to be one-to-one reach outs. They don't know who you are. Many of these buyers are getting many of these a week, if not a day. And so making it personal, thinking about like invitations and value for them is the key to demand gen at this stage for Co-Rise.
Yeah, awesome. Please do send it along, and I'll make sure to send it along to the audience as well. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. All right, next one. We're going to get a little vulnerable here at the GSV family. We're always doing so. And this one's going to be more about like a mistake that's been made. So do you have an example of a mistake you've made in the past that's led you to lose a deal? And like, what are some key learnings you could share from a mistake like that, so that the folks on the call don't make the same one? Trish, maybe we'll start, or Zayd, you're off mute, so I'm going to start with you here,
Okay.
and then we'll go over to Trish.
I was actually just reflecting on this last night. I hadn't done, like, all of a sudden at Co-Rise, like, I'm in sales meetings again, right? Not just like the executive meeting where you're closing the deal at the very end, right? You're in beginning sales. And I kept forgetting to do discovery. And like, I'd get in and be like, let me tell you about Co-Rise and why we're so amazing. And then I got off the call and I was like, man, I didn't ask that guy anything about what his problems were, why he's on the phone with me. Like, we chit-chatted and did some relationship building stuff, but I missed the discovery part of like the sales process, which is like sales 101. So I think my general guidance from this mistake is, depending on what stage your company's on, like, you're going to be selling as a founder, as a chief revenue officer, as a head of sales, whatever your role is, you're selling. Everyone in the company is selling. And so remembering what the like key sales steps are and like reviewing those as a company will help you go into these conversations in a way that's a lot more thoughtful. So my mistake was I didn't do discovery. And I sent it to my team. I was like, guys, I just did the call. I didn't do discovery. I think I need to get on the phone with him again because I don't know what I'm following up on.
This question is so hard because I've made so many mistakes over the years, like trying to pick one. It's like, really? I have to pick one of these? I would say one of the most common ones, though, that was hardest for me to unlearn old bad habits and teach my team new habits has been to sell the value, not the features. Selling product features so many times just sends you down a rabbit hole, and then you get into this feature by feature bake-off thing and you waste a lot of time and energy. Anytime I have stuck with the value that's going to be derived and the value that the customer is going to see, that typically goes so much better. And, you know, it reminds me of the times where I've debated where a prospect would say, oh, the price is too high. The price is too high. Come down on the price and I'll buy it. The price is rarely too high. What they're usually saying is that I will not receive the value associated with that price. And so many times they have the budget and they could spend it if they thought that they were going to see that value out of it. And so when discussing price or any of that kind of thing, I would say anchor on the value. And stay away from getting into the feature by feature bake off situation. And that'll set you up for success. I've found myself doing that multiple times, especially when you're so excited about the latest feature. You know, it's so easy to go down that path versus sticking to the value.
I love that. I think we're going to have to call this one last question before we wrap up, unfortunately. And I'll go ahead and package up, you know, some of the extra questions, and perhaps I could send them along an email, and we could do some of those over email. But last one here is all about how to kind of get the sales engine up and running. So you're a founder, you've kind of built your beta, right? You haven't done any lead generation, you haven't hired that first SDR, and you sort of have an idea of who your right customer would be, but you haven't really had too many of those conversations other than, you know, when you're trying to, you know, do your user testing and calls like that. Like, what are those first, I don't know, 3-5 things you're doing? Is it cold emails to potential customers? Is it putting together a list of leads or whatever it is that you would recommend, you know, someone like that start with? And Trish, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Zayd.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, hire the right people. Hire people that are super flexible, and set expectations that what you're doing today is probably going to change in a few weeks because we're going to be learning a lot. Hiring in that early stage, someone who wants a very predictable role and they're going to be doing the same thing for the next 2 years is a huge mistake, because that's rarely going to be the case. Hiring is key. The second thing is to make data-driven decisions. It's so easy in the early days to get so excited about your product and you think, oh, this is the best thing ever because I talked to this one person that solved their problem. You know, do market analysis, understand what the data is saying. What is the total addressable market? Who are the right buyers? So jumping right into building lead lists and starting to do emails, I think makes you feel good because you're checking a box and you know that those are things that need to be done. But there's a lot of preparation work that needs to be done before that in the data gathering phase. And then once you have the data, don't go into analysis paralysis because you'll stay there forever, but get enough data points to feel confident in taking some big bets. And if you've hired the right people, they're willing to do that. They're going to be scrappy and they're going to build the lead list and they're going to send the emails. One thing I would recommend, though, is think about scale early. So many times in the early days of sales, we get hooked into a high touch sale for too long. And then it's really hard to go backwards and do scale. If you're thinking about scale early on and occasionally you do the high touch thing, that's going to help you grow much faster. Getting locked into a high touch sales method in the early days just really makes it a lot harder for you to scale eventually.
And Zayd, maybe we could do an answer from you, you know, in like a minute, and then we'll be.
I'll do even better. I'll do it quick. I would say there's a couple things where you should do it depending on the stage your company's in. One is never forget top of funnel, because when you're super early and you're talking to 5 or 6 or 10 potential customers, you're like, wow, I'm doing great. This is amazing. And then 75% of them say no because you're too early, and then you have no one else to talk to. So always be thinking about your top of funnel and new conversations, new people to talk to, new people to pitch. And the way that we do that at this phase, because we don't have brand recognition yet, is through our networks. And so what I would just challenge everybody on this call to think about is like, from the investors of your organization to your own teams and the folks that you've hired and your founders to people you've worked with in the past, they all have networks. And if you have a really cool solution that's going to solve a big problem, ask them to do warm introductions to start building some of that top of funnel for you, because they likely know folks. And that warm introduction is going to go a lot better than that like typical sales activity that Trish is talking about, that until you have brand recognition, you're just going to be ignored no matter how many emails you send out, because no one knows who you are or why you're emailing them. And so those are my 2 guidances, is always be thinking about top of funnel and finding new people to talk to, and then ask everyone you know shamelessly for introductions to people that you might think could be a potential customer.
And that's all the way back to relationships. So I love that. Well, I just have to say thank you both so much, for making the time to participate in this. And, I know I did, and I'm sure the audience got a ton out of it. And we really appreciate it. And thanks to our audience for sharing their time and energy with us as well. It is energizing to have this opportunity to be here with everyone today. Next month, we'll have a session on business to consumer virality. And we hope to see a lot of you there. Other than that, thanks again for joining, and we'll catch you next time. And good luck to our 2023 applicants.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brand.
Thank you.